Welcome back for another edition of Less Kevin, More Tech from UTECit.com. And we've got Les, I think we won a lottery ticket. We got another great guest today. But we keep on improving, we fall forward, I guess, right? Or fall up.
Well, we're definitely we're definitely in the tall grass, or tall cotton, as you like to say.
Well, most of these guys any of our 27 listeners will recognize this person. He was the eye candy of state government for many times, and he hated that term because he said really he was the brains behind the administration for 8 great years at the state of Michigan, and now he's leading small businesses all over Michigan. So without further ado, we have Brian Calley from SBAM. Welcome, Brian.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I really look forward to our conversation, and what an opportunity, what a time as well. Having the privilege of leading the Small Business Association of Michigan, even with all the interesting things I've done in my career, just the mission, the people, what we're about. It's tough work. It's important work. But every day I get to wake up and go to work on a mission that is so deeply important to every facet of life in America, and especially life in our communities across Michigan, and that being small business entrepreneurs. So great to be with you to talk about it.
Well, you need new staff, because if your staff put this in front of you, you're on with us, and you're looking forward to our conversation. They misled you, Brian. You're in trouble.
You guys are great partners. Happy to do it.
Hey, Brian. I just heard you you use the word mission. I don't know. I think 3 times, and so there's a lot of passion that's in that word mission. So, I'm curious, how did this start with you and SBAM, and what's behind the passion?
SBAM has been around for, it's been 55 years now. So a lot longer than I've been with SBAM now. For me, it's about 5 years. But the organization, the mission of the organization is pretty simple and straightforward. The success of Michigan small businesses. That's what we're all about. And it takes a lot of different forms, and as many different forms as what we see across entrepreneurs in our state. And that's the way that we see it, is that the people that we represent, people who own businesses, and that's where we're really set up for the owner of the business. That's our key constituency. That's why we exist. But that's a picture of Michigan. That's a picture of our communities. In most communities across the state, including big communities, the main jobs infrastructure, the main economic infrastructure of the community, what makes it work, they're entrepreneurs that are just putting everything on the line, pushing out and all their chips on an enterprise, on a small business, and that creates opportunity for that community, creates opportunity for and sometimes I know, like with entrepreneurs, it's like, they're the last ones to get paid out of this, out of the whole venture. And so it really is creating opportunity for everybody around in and around communities in our state. So it's a privilege. It's an honor to work for people that do that and play such an important role. I had a friend the other day that I like but put it this way. It said, "Big business are the headlines, small business is the story." And
Nice.
really, that's what. Yeah, and that's just true. The big business always gets the headlines, but when you really look at where the majority of opportunity for economic prosperity comes from, it's entrepreneurs, and it's a lonely job too. It's one of the other things that we've kind of, I'd say we almost accidentally came across, is the importance of peer-to-peer interaction among business owners is now a hallmark of what we do. It's different than it's like mixers and networking events that people do when it's all just salespeople. it's all piranha, no cow, right? Nobody's really having fun there. And but for us, when we put people together and build crowds, it's just people that own businesses, because it can be lonely at the top. You don't really have people, even in your own family, that really understand the pressures of having to deliver, having to be the rainmaker, having to solve the problems, having to be responsible for so many other people's livelihoods, and probably have a lien against your house. If the business fails, you lose everything. I mean, that all those types of pressures, nobody gets that unless you own a business. You really don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, that's we jumped in '08, and that's why I kept on telling my wife during the housing crisis, we'll give it to them. They don't need any more houses. We'll probably get a couple more months before we're done. But you talked about the mixers, and I think that's a great thing just to throw out right now with if folks go to the SBAM website. I know Les and I have been to a few and really enjoyed them, but they're all around the state, and it's a great way for business owners to go and network, meet the SBAM staff, talk about the issues at hand, and get to meet other business owners to connect. And I think it's a great event.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is a hallmark now of what we do. We call them owner to owner events to make it very clear that this isn't the sort of, if you want to participate, you don't send the salesperson for your company, it's for the owner of the business. And you spend time with other owners of businesses. And we do some programming, and that's almost like the excuse to get together. But the real reason is for business owners to know and find their people and in their community. And we do them all over the state. We love to, and you don't even have to be a member to attend. We love to have people become members, but this really, we're about building a community of business owners, community of entrepreneurs. And we just want you to know the other entrepreneurs in your area, because that peer-to-peer interactions we've just discovered over time. It was something that we used to think was kind of cool that we did, that now we see as like a main thing, like a core part of what we do is connect business owners with other business owners.
Yeah, I found them to be valuable. But the one thing, from my perspective, is being a member of SBAM is that you're really providing a voice for small business that I don't think can be created individually.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. That's how we look at almost everything that we do, is that small business, when you put it all together, is a real force. But any
Mm-hmm.
small business on their own, like getting access and kind of that show of force and power in a very big system, the rule making system, that how the
Mm-hmm.
laws get made, and like when we put all these voices together, it carries a lot of weight, and and there's also a lot of goodwill there, but it needs to be like organized and unified, so it's clear that it's not one-offs. It's really the main economic like theme and infrastructure across the whole state in virtually every community. So that's an important aspect, putting those voices together in order to make change and impact. So like with us, where we have 33,000 members,
Mm-hmm.
that there's so much force behind it. And then what we find, the political people, they all, no matter where they're at, all across the whole political spectrum, they always want to at least appear small business. They all describe themselves as pro small business, but we're the ones who really decide. Our members, like small business owners, we're the ones who decide if they actually are. And so by communicating, not just communicating, but kind of defining, hey, here's what it means to be pro small business. Here's a rule being proposed, and here's how it's going to affect small businesses. It's going to help in this way, or it's going to hurt in that way, and then really and holding people accountable, and that really matters, or that matters a lot. But it's really only influential when you put those together, or it's much more influential when you put a lot of people together.
Well, I'm going to jump right in there, Brian, and I think that's a good segue to something right now. The courts have made decisions, and it's time for these politicians to walk the walk, right? We've got an overtime and a paid sick leave law that's, the court said, here's what you got to do. And I think most businesses did that, but I don't think business owners truly understand the impacts it has on us. Go back to your big business makes headlines, small business is a story. The headlines is these big bad businesses are doing this to people. In practicality, small businesses are doing this right now anyways, but it's creating problems. Can you explain more about what the impact would be?
Yeah, there are several things that are happening right now at the state and federal level that are going to be tough, make it tougher to be successful in owning and operating a small business. And the political people, they do love to say that they're doing it because of big business, but you notice that big businesses aren't really complaining too much because they're set up for this. Like they've got teams of compliance lawyers and departments, and like their ability to adjust and comply with a one size fits all government mandate is such that it probably in the long run will be better for them because it snuffs out small business competition. But one of the things I'm pretty concerned about is the new paid sick leave requirements. It's not just that there's a requirement to offer paid sick leave. Most small businesses already do that. But I am confident in saying that 100% of all businesses that have an employee, at least one employee, 100% of them will have to change how they operate in order to comply with this law. It's so unusual, it's so onerous that nobody would have just done it like this on their own. It's a one of a kind. There's no other of 50 states. Michigan is truly unique. That not in having a requirement, but how they're requiring this to be.
Administrating it.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of examples. So you'd think, oh, well, if there's a minimum now, any business with over 10 employees or more have to offer 72 hours, 9 days of paid sick leave per year. If you're 1 to 9 employees, then 40 hours of paid sick leave and 32 hours of unpaid sick leave guaranteed every year. So you have these two different standards depending on the size. Everybody has to comply. But you would think, oh, I give 2 weeks of PTO, paid time off. They could use it for sick leave. They could use it for vacation. So it would be reasonable for an employer to think incorrectly, by the way, to think, oh, I already offered 2 weeks of paid time off. It could be used for sick time. I already meet this requirement. It doesn't affect me. Wrong. How you do it doesn't comply with this law. So what you have, the only way that you can count your paid sick your PTO general leave bank toward this paid sick leave requirement is if it complies with all the requirements of the paid sick leave in this new law. Those requirements include you may not require them to pre-schedule it. You may not require that time off to be approved. You may not even ask why unless it's more than 3 days or any sort of like indication of why an absence is occurring.
Wow.
So nobody has that type of a policy. They also put in place a no call, no show allowance for employees. So you cannot require any explanation or verification of the use of the paid sick leave, those 9 days, unless they're gone for 3 consecutive days. 3 consecutive days. So somebody could no call, no show for 3 days. They show up on the 4th day. You can't say anything. And if you take any disciplinary action, then the law presumes that you are in violation of this law. And it is this is very explicit. This isn't commentary. This is very explicit that the law is written such that the employer has to prove that they are innocent. That the presumption is that the employer has retaliated against their employee.
Yeah. Right.
And so you have to prove there is no burden whatsoever on the employee to prove anything. If they make an accusation, it is 100% on the employer's part to prove that they did it correctly. And unfortunately, doing it correctly means that you can no longer enforce punctuality. So if you had, remember I said 3 consecutive days, but let's take the other extreme. Let's say that you have an employee that is chronically a half hour late to work. So you could be late to work by a half an hour 144 times per year, and the employer would be prohibited from taking any corrective action whatsoever. That's what this law says. That's why I say that nobody would naturally comply with this law because it's so unusual and onerous to the employer.
So in the case of, well, I'm sorry, Kevin, but in the case of like job abandonment, somebody could stretch it, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yes.
Because they could show up one day and that breaks the consecutive string. They can show up late.
That's correct. And so that most employee hand is very common. Like most employee handbooks would say that if a person doesn't show up or call 3 days in a row, that they're considered to have quit. So it's not that you fire them, that you just consider that like you just didn't want to work here anymore and you quit. So that particular standard, that is, I would say that the most common standard that you would find in such things in employee handbooks would become illegal. Couldn't do it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the people that are chronically late, here's the other kind of kicker. It's a real punch in the gut for employers. And I probably, the listeners, all their blood pressure is going up right now. But like the kicker is that if you take any disciplinary action against an employer for any reason at all, it might have nothing to do with sick leave or being late or anything like that, any disciplinary action for any reason whatsoever, and they have used paid sick leave in the last 90 days, the law presumes there is a rebuttable presumption in Michigan law now that says that you have taken retaliation against that employee. And it is up to you to prove that the disciplinary action that you took was something other than because they used their paid sick leave in the previous 90 days. So it creates such a dynamic between the employer and employee that you can't enforce punctuality anymore. If you've got an operation that's public facing where you need to make sure that you're open and can provide customer service at certain hours and certain times, it's going to make that very difficult if, and here's the other thing too. I want to make sure it's really clear though, that most employees are not going to abuse this. Most employees are very dependable and reliable and are going to do the job and show up on time and do their best. But some employees won't. I mean, it's just the way the world works, right? Some aren't. And if somebody is abusing the system and the employer can do nothing about it, it causes such a morale problem with the rest of the team because they're the ones that have to pick up the pieces. They're the ones that have to pick up the slack. They're the ones that have to, and so that's why in this case you got kind of two problems. You've got the issue of not being able to manage anymore, employers not being able to manage important aspects of the business, but also the morale hit to the other employees who are doing their best but are getting having to pick up the pieces for when you have and if you have enough employees, from time to time you're going to have problem employees. That's just how the world works.
So artificial intelligence is a big thing right now. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that thank you to the Michigan courts, they've now developed artificial stupidity, right?
Actually, it's not artificial.
that was UTEC. Yeah. That wasn't SBAM. That was UTEC. Full disclosure. No, but I think it's
very authentic. Actually, I think that's authentic stupidity. But here's you bring up artificial intelligence. Kind of an interesting tale to this. So here's what I expect to happen because of this and other things. So you've got the Department of Labor that is making it difficult for independent contractors to operate. You've got the Department of Labor that is increasing the overtime threshold from the mid-30s up to 58,000 just in the course of 6 months. You have the Corporate Transparency Act that the IRS and FinCEN are implementing. Really high stakes things that are making it difficult to operate, in some cases difficult to employ people. The incentive to explore artificial intelligence options to avoid employment or automation or different business models where people can run a business with fewer employees, the incentive or the investment threshold now is such that it's more attractive, right? And so
Yeah,
you're going to
it
see, I
sounds
think
like
you're
it,
going to see acceleration toward these things.
right?
Well, I use us as an example. We a few years ago we got tired of scorekeeping. For all the different days, we said everybody gets 20 days. I mean, if you're off, you're off, right? It doesn't matter if you call it a PTO or a sick day. You got 20 days. Use them as you see fit, and that way they're not faking sick to get more. It was just easier, right? You got 20 days.
Yeah.
Everybody knew it, and you operate it, and life can go on. Now with this, now we've got to have somebody track score, keep the stuff. And you got to be careful you don't say anything the wrong way that you're
Hmm.
in violation of that. And I think of a pizza shop that would have 12 employees, and if 6 of them said, "Hey, we're just not coming in for 3 days in a row for whatever reason," if you don't have vacation planned, you're out of business. How do you service a
Yeah.
customer?
I love to go to Michigan State football games. Imagine you're in the hospitality industry on game weekend. Okay. So like, and you're trying to, like the idea of people taking sick days or, like that sort of thing, because, they don't, those undesirable, the less desirable shifts or
Right.
things that are competing with other stuff happening.
Sure.
um, it's just going to be so much harder to staff. And so what'll end up happening, it makes the businesses less viable long term.
Hmm.
It's going to make it so employers have to separate out their leave banks, just like you just described. So now you have a general leave bank, but really in the future, it's probably going to make sense, unless they make a change. It's probably going to make sense for you to divide that up and say, nope, you get 9 sick days to leave this, and those are subject to all these standards and requirements, and the other 11 days are for vacation. Like that's the old way of doing it. Hardly anybody does it that way anymore. But this law makes it so there's a big incentive to go back to the old way.
Hmm.
And then we haven't even talked about accruals. Like before, you might not keep close track. Like at SBAM, we have 30. There are 34 people that work at SBAM right now at the Small Business Association of Michigan. A lot of these are like professional positions, and as a manager, what I care is about productivity. Did the work get done? I'm not really concerned on whether today it took 7.5 hours to do and tomorrow it took 8.5 hours to do. I don't really. I mean, that's not a thing that employees can like fit their work into their life instead of having to figure out how to fit their life into their work. I mean, um, that's a key competitive advantage for smaller organizations, is you could provide max flexibility. But after this takes effect, we are going to, all of us employers are going to have meticulous, detailed records down to the minute of when a person started and stopped their work, because tied to it is an accrual. This benefit requires that you accrue based on the number of hours worked. And if you do not keep those detailed, meticulous records for 3 years, you will not, and there's a dispute of some sort, failure of you being able to show exactly that your accruals match exactly the hours worked, they presume that the employer is in the wrong, that is at fault. So we will have to develop a brand new system that right now only exists for non-exempt employees that get overtime. Those you do have to keep track of when they're working at but for an exempt employee, um, many of them now are gonna lose flexibility, or at least they're subject to like reporting of exactly when they're off and when they're on, like the idea, like pick up the kids from school, or going to take the dog for a walk, or I just want to watch an episode of Parks and Rec, or what. I mean, like there's all these things that could happen. And that today, as long as so many smaller employers, look, as long as the work gets done, it's fine. And
You know,
that's going to change. I mean, this law, and again, we're trying to get the legislature to change it, but unless they do, this is the system that we have at the moment.
Brian, I was, at our last meeting there in Lansing, I was sitting with a gentleman. He owns about a half a dozen convenience stores, and what his perspective is, everybody everywhere's battling inflation, and every one of these items that come down to him, he in turn says, I have to raise my price, and just to cover his added expense. And
Right.
Yeah, and so, he's looking at this as not only, inconvenience to him as a business owner, but this to the ultimate consumer is inflationary. It's almost like a tax.
Yeah, and it will raise costs, and I think it's reasonable to assume that it will end up costing consumers more across a lot of different in a lot of different ways. And in so many people don't realize how small margins are in most businesses. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a small margin. So if costs go up, prices have to go up, or else the
They
business
have
is
to.
no longer sustainable. I wanted to point out too. I said, this is the law in Michigan. It is the law in Michigan right now, but there's a delay in implementation. It's February 21st of next year. All the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of the paid sick leave requirements,
Hmm.
you have until February 21st to be compliant. In the meantime, one of the things that we're doing at the Small Business Association of Michigan and a coalition with a bunch of other organizations is to advocate for changes to the legislature. And so we're going in and talking to Republicans and Democrats and people in the bureaucracy that are charged with enforcing this, and the governor's office, is to lay out, here's what we think needs to change. We know there's a mandate in place, and the mandate is not going to be repealed, or at least no time soon. But the idea of saying, look, if somebody has a general leave bank, you guys offer 20 days of vacation or of paid time off, and it can be used for sick leave or vacation or whatever. The employee gets to do it. Well, if you do that, then we think you ought to just be exempt from this law. Look, you're way over 72 hours. You ought to not have to do the accruals. You ought to not have to comply with the no call, no show. You should just be exempt. And so that's one of the things that we're asking for. There's those rebuttable presumptions, those litigation risks that exist. They're so one-sided, and so they just invite a litigious environment. And we just think that these things right now are handled by the wage and hour division in the state, and we think that's where it ought to stay. These shouldn't be things that invite litigation and court. Get the lawyers involved, and it really does jack up the costs even more. The idea of having to provide notice if you're not going to be there, like this no call, no show allowance, it's ridiculous. How can you operate with that type of situation? Like, it ought to require some sort of minimum standard of notice if you're going to use this time. And they say on there that you have to provide, the employee has to provide notice as soon as is practical. So we say, what does practical mean? Well, practical, because you, the employer, are barred from asking for any reason, documentation, expectation until more than 3 consecutive days. That means that the standard of whether or not their notice or lack of notice is practical, it's solely the discretion of the employee. The employer you can't even ask. And if you can't even ask the reason why somebody is gone, how can you make it determine if it was practical, whether or not they provided you notice? So the idea that there's a requirement that they provide notice as soon as it's practical is meaningless, because the only one who can decide whether or not it's practical is the person taking the leave. So it just creates a different dynamic between the employer and the employee. And it creates a management challenge that we just think is unworkable. So we're just asking for these changes. It's not saying, hey, reduce the 72 hours down to something else. We're not, we do oppose the idea of employer mandates, but we're not asking for that change. We want this to be administratively possible to implement without really harming the business.
Well, I don't think there's a business out there that would argue with that, because you got to give your people time off to stay competitive, to have employees. But as you said, it's the scorekeeping of all this. And just think about the tax just with the lawyers. I mean, just to file a lawsuit, just to go through it, you're going to settle before you go to the court. We're going to tie up the courts if you do try to see this through. We have a lot of peers in California, and they're fleeing California just because of the laws are written against you. You're presumed to be a bad guy if you're employing somebody and giving them a living. And the lawyers it's crazy. My accountant, she just shook me down. You mentioned the the transparency thing, and I love you, Chris Singh, but she just shook me down for some compliance issues because of a small business. Can you talk about the transparency?
Yeah, the Corporate Transparency Act. So this is a new requirement that went into effect January 1st of this year. It's already in effect. This is a federal law. And the federal law, it's in the IRS and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So the term you hear is FinCEN, that stands for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And that division, that law enforcement division of the IRS, is charged with implementing this law. And what it says is that you have to report to them, to the IRS, who are the beneficial owners of every entity that is either less than $5 million in revenues or 20 or fewer employees, which is truly ironic. So like, if you are bigger, you don't have to comply with this. This is only for small businesses. And they say they're trying to catch like money launderers and people financing terrorism. And I guess if terrorists want to get out of this, all they got to do is make their operation a little bigger.
Yeah.
Like it's just so crazy how they've done this. But there's actually there's huge financial penalties for not complying. So you have to file with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and say, who are the beneficial owners of your company? And it's not like a one and done thing. Anytime something changes, you have to report that change, even like an address, anything like that. But the hard part about it is that beneficial owner, like to us out that live in like the regular world, we think, oh, that's pretty straightforward. Anybody who has an ownership interest in the business, right? You'd think, oh, that's what that means. No, that is not what that means to the government. The government beneficial owner means anybody with substantial control. So where does substantial control begin and end? If somebody works at a business and they can make decisions in that business, when do their decision-making power, when does that become substantial? Now imagine you've got a business that has a manager in it who does have substantial control. You hire lawyers and the lawyers tell you, yep, that person has substantial control. The IRS would likely consider them a beneficial owner, even though they're not an owner of the company. Now you, the owner of the business, have to go to that person and say, hey, I need to collect some sensitive personal information from you and report it to the IRS just in case I do something wrong with my business so they can come after all of us. I mean, it's just, and we fought this one off for a long time. And on a standalone basis, we won. The National Small Business Association has done a great job with this, and a lot of other organizations around the country. They propose this year after year after year, and we were able to defeat it, and it never got put into law. And then, but the way that they got it passed is they tucked it in this other massive, like national defense contract, like bill, that had like all these other things, and this got swept up in it or kind of hidden in it. And so a lot of people were really surprised, like, whoa, this passed? Like, when did this pass? Yeah, it was hidden in another bill is when it passed.
Don't they call it?
Yeah, well, ironically, a lot of people, what we found was that a lot of people in Congress didn't even know that they voted for it. So, but this is in effect right now. And so you have to report. And now here's the thing is, we're challenging this in federal court. We have sued. The Small Business Association of Michigan has sued the IRS, the U.S. federal government, saying that this is a violation of our constitutional rights, that we don't believe that they had the authority to pass it in the first place because it doesn't require interstate commerce. Even if you don't do any interstate commerce, you still have to comply with this law. So we think that they weren't authorized to pass it in the first place. We think that it is a violation of our Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights. We're talking about Bill of Rights stuff here. Fourth and Fifth Amendments, definitely a legal search and seizure. They're doing a search on business owners with absolutely no suspicion whatsoever, with criminal penalties as a possibility. So we believe. So while we don't have a problem with them going after people money laundering and that sort of thing, but you can't do it by treating all small business owners as criminals. Like that's too far. It's not reasonable. You shouldn't subject the heroes of our economy to that type of treatment. So we've actually taken it's the first time we've ever sued the federal government. It feels like a David versus Goliath type of
Mhm.
situation, but we're just so determined that we are in the right here, that this is not a reasonable thing. But let's talk about the compliance part. Because I would definitely say don't mess around with this one. Comply by the deadlines you have to comply, because there are stiff penalties if you don't, um, until we win this lawsuit. So you have, if your business existed before January 1st of this year, your business existed before January 1st, then you have until December 31st to do your first filing. Okay, so December 31st, that's your deadline. You don't have to do it early. There's no extra points for doing it early. There's no penalty for doing it late. Put it on your calendar. Unless you hear from us that we won this lawsuit and there's a stay on it or something, make sure you get your filing done. However, if you started a business after January 1st of 2024, so January 21st of this calendar year, if you started a new entity since then, you only have 90 days to comply. And I'm very concerned that there are many new businesses that have been formed this year that have no idea that this is even a requirement, because true to
They're
form,
trying to get
they
off the
haven't
ground.
really communicated this well. Yeah. And they haven't put it out there. Like, people don't even know about this. So, you are supposed to have filed within 90 days. Now, I don't think they're coming after people yet for noncompliance, because there wouldn't be enough prison space. It's a 2-year felony, by the way, for voluntary noncompliance. And then if something change, once you do your first filing, you have to report any change. So let's say one of the beneficial owners has a new driver's license number. You have to report that within 30 days of that change of their driver's license number. If somebody moves and their address changes, you have to report that within 30 days of that change happening. So this is not one where it's like, oh, I just got to make sure I do it every year at the same time. It's not like that. You have to do it within 30 days of any change of anything that you reported before. And that makes it more difficult to comply, or more. You can see how it would be more likely that a person would accidentally not comply. How do you even know? What if you have a beneficial owner that moved and you didn't know, or they got a new passport, so and they use the passport for the identification. And they didn't think to tell you, like, hey, I got a new passport number. You have 30 days to report this. It wouldn't even come up in normal kind of like business dealings. So that's what we're concerned about. Not only that people don't know about it, but the requirement for the ongoing reporting is not something that will naturally happen. It's something that has to be intentionally and actively managed.
All right, I thought we were looking forward to this conversation today.
Well, the good news is that we're almost at the end of the time. I can't drop very much more bad information on you.
Do you got anything good for us?
Well, one thing that I will say though is that I have seen first of all, business owners are resilient, but I've also seen a level of determination rise up among entrepreneurs to do something about this. We have good people that do great advocacy work on behalf of small businesses in the system, like, working it every day. But there's no substitute for business owners, people that own businesses, talking to their legislators and saying, look, this is a problem. And if you value small businesses, we need you to deal with this urgently. And that makes kind of plows the ground for the work that we have to do. So I would say, reach out. There are people that represent you in the state legislature and in Congress. And when you reach out and say you're a business owner, that's going to matter to them, because they want to at least appear as though they're pro small business. So, there's a lot of goodwill there. Identify yourself as a business owner and demand action, and then we'll take it from there.
There's resources on SBAM, and I think some of the chambers have sent some stuff around to contact them. But this is our chance as business owners, right, to go hold these elected officials accountable. And again, we're not arguing left or right issues here. We're just arguing business issues, and we need them to step in and apply some common sense here. So I know you're pressed for time. I know you're busy working on behalf of us small businesses, so we have to let you go do the important work. But we'd love to have you back again. And normally when we close out our shows, we always ask, what somebody's favorite bourbon is. So in the interest of time, we're going to give you a layup here. And we'll stick inside government. Who was the best all-time lieutenant governor at the state of Michigan?
Oh, the best all time. I don't know.
Uh-oh.
I'd say it was at least a tie. How about I'll do the best one that wasn't me. Um, Maybe make it a little bit easier. There was another lieutenant governor from my area back. I'm from a very rural area in Michigan. There happens to be another one, and his name was Alonzo Sessions. And this guy did everything. He was a county sheriff. He was the chair of the board of commissioners, called the board of supervisors back then. But he also was a justice of the peace and a lieutenant governor. And I've always really enjoyed that legacy. That was over 100 years ago.
Wow.
And so
See, we
I
didn't
don't
even
feel any
prep you with this.
I don't even I don't feel any pressure to live up to Alonzo Sessions, because nobody else except for me remembers him, but or knows about him. But yeah, he was a pretty cool character. One of the things on the resume, oh, he started a bank too. But one of the things on his resume was that he was lieutenant governor.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you for your time, and kudos to your staff. That they do a wonderful job over there, taking your vision and implementing that, and helping support us. And we appreciate your leadership there at SBAM and doing all things for small business.
Yep.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.